A distressed woman seeks help after an altercation in her home.
She was quite hysterical. He attacked her and she shot him.
She did not know if he was alive or dead.
There was not a question of who did it. It was more of a question of why did it happen.
The investigation uncovers terrifying allegations of mental and physical abuse.
He's been coming after us for 3.5 years.
Did he ever get physical?
It's emotional like you wouldn't believe.
But when a series of lies are exposed, detectives must sort fact from fiction in this high-profile couple's history.
They would travel, they would go to functions, they were in magazines.
She was carrying a weapon in front of Secret Service.
She tells the nurses she's been poisoned. Was she fearing for her life, or was she executing a thorough plot?
She didn't know what else to do. It got to that point where she snapped.
Lakewood Ranch, Florida is a private neighborhood known for its safety. But security gates can't protect its residents from each other. At 7 p.m. on September 27, 2020, sheriff's deputies are called to the scene of a domestic disturbance.
Dispatch receives a 911 call from an older man saying that his neighbor has just come to his house and that she had shot her husband.
She came in, she was quite hysterical. She said that he attacked her and she shot him. Just between you and me, the son of a bitch has been harassing him and threatening him for a long time.
The caller identifies the woman as 28-year-old Ashley Benefield. He says the victim is her estranged husband, 58-year-old Doug Benefield.
Doug and Ashley were not living together. They had not been living together for about 3 years.
She did not know if he was alive or dead. The neighbor was very concerned that he might be coming to the door next.
Where is the gun? Is it with her, or is it just...
I have it right here, ma'am. I'm also armed if he does come over and try to harm her.
And Ashley's family is due to return at any moment.
Ashley was living with her mother and her daughter, and Ashley's mom decided to just take her to the park. That was typical for them. They went to the park every night in the summer.
I'm kind of concerned with her mother and the little girl might get back there and find this.
Deputies are running as fast as they can, okay?
When the neighbor was on the phone with the dispatcher, he told them that Ashley was going to come out. And they instructed him to tell her to have her hands up and just to walk out towards the deputies.
She was absolutely very much in a state of shock. It's a lot of information for the mind to process.
Ashley is unable to tell deputies what led to the shooting, so they put her in a patrol car and enter the house to look for Doug.
They find Doug Benefield in the back bedroom. He is semi-conscious.
The deputies on scene observed that he had one wound to his right leg and one wound to his upper right chest area.
They cut his shirt off. They tried to perform CPR and tried to resuscitate him, but he died before he was able to arrive at the hospital.
Law enforcement thought that it was a domestic dispute that had gotten out of hand and ended up with Doug being shot and killed.
There was not a question of, as they say, who did it. It was more of a question of why did it happen? What was going on between Ashley and Doug?
Doug Benefield was born on October 2, 1961, and grew up in a military family.
Doug grew up in Huntsville, Alabama. His father was working for NASA at the Space Center there on project development. His mother, Suzanne, was a stay-at-home mom. Doug's parents were at church most every Sunday, and that really made an imprint for his whole life. Doug finished high school there before going off to college. And his intention after Texas A&M was to go off to medical school.
The U.S. Navy offered to pay for Doug's medical school, but after he enlisted, his career path took a different turn.
He ends up operating off aircraft carriers as a naval flight officer during Desert Storm and making 2 deployments.
After the Navy, Doug used his family connections to become an entrepreneur.
In 1999, Doug retires from active service, stays in the Navy Reserves. He's gotten introduced to all the things going on with the renovations and the restoration of downtown Charleston. So he decides to open a restaurant, and it was fabulously successful.
Only one thing was missing from Doug's life: a family of his own.
When Doug met Renee at this Irish pub, she was a single mom, 2 boys, raising them by herself. Very, very intelligent, college graduate, very strong practicing Christian. All of those things attracted Doug.
Doug and Renee married the same year they met. Their daughter Eva was born 2 years later in 2001. They spent 16 years together until Renee tragically died of an undiagnosed heart condition.
The loss of Renee was just a crushing blow. It caused him to go even stronger into his faith.
Dealing with the tragedy of losing Renee the way they did, Doug and Eva became even closer than they already were.
The last thing on Doug's mind was another relationship. But the following year, he met a beautiful young woman named Ashley Byers.
In August of 2016, Doug's investor partners and their political action committee have decided that they're going to back Donald Trump. And then there's a presidential candidate event in West Palm Beach, Florida. And Doug's invited. At the time, Ashley is the events coordinator, a volunteer on the Donald Trump staff.
Though Doug was 54 at the time and Ashley was 24, they had a lot in common.
They bonded quite a bit over religion. They bonded over politics. They had the same political views.
They had a very faith-based approach to life. They also had a very open attitude toward guns.
Both of them were concealed carry permit holders, and Ashley was carrying a weapon the first night that Doug met Ashley in front of Secret Service. All of what Ashley presented, not only physically, but in her interest and in her belief system, grew that initial attraction.
Over the course of the night, Doug learned Ashley hadn't always been involved in politics. Her first love was dancing.
She began ballet at a very young age. She loved it. She loved to dance. She joined a dance company after high school, and she danced professionally up until her early 20s when she sustained a knee injury. She then segued into modeling and was working as a swimsuit model. And then in 2016, she and her mother went to the Robarts Arena in Sarasota to attend a Donald Trump event. And Mr. Trump picked her out of the crowd. And after talking with him, he hired her to work for him. Ashley gets along really well with people, so she did a very good job.
Doug was immediately smitten by Ashley, and the feeling was mutual.
She was attracted to his, what she perceived as maturity. He knew what he wanted, and he had the same priorities as her.
It was a mutual obsession. After a meeting at the political rally, they decided to get married just 13 days later in a private ceremony.
As a strong practicing Christian, Doug was completely set on marrying quickly. Doug doesn't tell anyone in the family about marrying Ashley. He knew he had to do it in private and quietly, or we would have stopped him.
After the wedding, Ashley left the campaign trail to start a life with Doug in Charleston.
They would travel, they would go to functions where they dressed very nice. They were in magazines.
In 2018, their family grew when Ashley gave birth to a daughter. But by 2020, it had all fallen apart. Now, Doug is dead after Ashley shot him in what appears to be a case of domestic violence.
While Ashley's in the back of the patrol car, still on scene, her mother returns from the park, and she has Ashley's daughter with her.
She approached the house and started seeing everything that was going on. She believed that Ashley was dead.
She walks up with the, oh my God, my daughter. He killed her. He finally killed her.
He hasn't been coming after us for 3.5 years. 3.5 years he had been begging for help, and nobody has helped us.
Has he been arrested for domestic before?
He knows how to play the game.
Does he ever get physical?
It's emotional like you wouldn't believe.
Ashley's mother says they've already reached out to Ashley's attorneys, who called a therapist aware of Doug and Ashley's history to the scene for support. They stay with Ashley's daughter, while officers accompany Ashley to the sheriff's office to make a statement. At the station, they find her attorneys already there waiting for them.
The fact that the therapist was on the scene so quickly and that these attorneys appeared certainly made the investigators leery. This case was going to be very complicated.
Coming up, detectives hear about claims of abuse.
The most aggressive Doug had been with her was after she told him that she was pregnant.
But the crime scene raises questions about Ashley's story.
The trajectory of the fatal bullet indicated that he wasn't coming directly at her.
Manatee County sheriffs are investigating the shooting death of Doug Benefield. They're hoping to get a statement from his wife, Ashley Benefield, but her lawyers advise her to remain silent. Instead, investigators get a statement from a therapist familiar with the couple's complicated history.
Dr. Barbara Russell is a therapist who specializes in domestic violence, and Dr. Russell was very well aware of this relationship.
I first got involved with this case when I met Ashley in the spring of 2020 at the recommendation of her attorney.
Dr. Russell tells investigators that the Benefields' marriage started out like the perfect partnership.
Ashley always had a love of ballet, and she wanted to start a ballet company.
Doug knew that participating in such a thing would be the fulfillment of Ashley's dream, and so he suggested that they create this national ballet company and that he would finance it.
Doug, being an innovator, put the ballet company together with funding from his investor partners. In the summer of 2017, Doug and Ashley have begun to hire dancers for the ballet company. They've hired staff.
But according to Dr. Russell, Ashley soon realized that Doug couldn't fulfill her dream.
They started to have kind of some problems, financial, I believe. They laid off a handful of the dancers that had been hired.
The ballet pretty quickly starts to crumble, and with it, their relationship did as well.
Fights between the two became frequent, and Ashley said Doug turned out to be a different man than the one she'd fallen in love with.
He would try to use kind of controlling tactics, dictate what friends that she could hang out with, what she could wear. From what I had gleaned from different reports that Ashley made, the allegations that were raised started to really have credence.
When she learned she was pregnant, she had expected, if anything, that her being pregnant would make him less aggressive. And instead, it escalated the situation.
The type of things that he was doing escalated to shooting a gun into the ceiling.
Fearing for her life and the life of their unborn child, Ashley obtained a protective order against Doug. According to Dr. Russell, Ashley left him a note ending the marriage and went to live with her mother in Florida. But Doug couldn't accept it.
She had really hoped that he would stay away. Instead, he came to Florida.
Dr. Russell says Ashley spent the next 3 years in courtrooms trying to finalize the divorce, but Doug refused to go away.
He'd been showing up at the house more often. He had a tracker on Ashley's car. Ashley found evidence in his text messages that he was getting the reports from the tracker. She would often be driving around and would look in the rearview mirror, and he would be there.
By that point, we had gone through a couple years of cases pending in the courts. We still had the divorce pending and an attempt to co-parent with each other, but she wanted to have her daughter 100% of the time.
To escape the situation, Ashley and her mother began planning a move to Maryland.
She wanted a sense of peace. She was hoping that moving to Maryland would bring that.
But when Doug found out, he got a job in Maryland and insisted on joining them.
As the weeks got closer to this anticipated move, Ashley became increasingly fearful for her safety.
To authorities familiar with domestic violence, it sounds like a powder keg waiting to explode.
Doug is allowed to have visitation with his child, but Ashley was actually speaking to her lawyer about getting an injunction against Doug to prevent him from having contact with his child and her.
There was a great deal of concern that Doug would eventually do significant physical harm, if not take Ashley's life.
However, others that knew Doug find the allegations hard to believe.
His daughter, Eva, was in South Carolina at the time, but she knew in her heart that something wasn't right. Doug was an extremely conscientious, mindful person. I think every step he took was along a path of creating a happy family.
Ashley made false allegations against him to prevent any chance of him getting custody of their daughter. I knew that wasn't who Doug was, to ever physically abuse anyone, especially the mother of his child and his wife.
Law enforcement needs credible evidence to support her claims, or they needed to get to the bottom of what was going on in the family.
Just hours after discovering Doug Benefield shot in his home, detectives are learning the details of his alleged abuse. But they want to hear from his wife, Ashley Benefield, about the circumstances of the shooting itself.
I have a search warrant, okay? And your attorney's here. I'm going to give it a copy to both of you so you guys can read it.
Law enforcement gave her the opportunity to make a statement, and she refused.
Ashley was not in a good state of mind to give any kind of a statement. She was very overwhelmed emotionally.
Although she invokes her right to remain silent, Ashley cooperates with the rest of the investigation.
After they swabbed Miss Benefield for DNA and took photographs, they released her to go home.
Because Ashley didn't give a statement and there were no witnesses, law enforcement only could go based on what was found at the crime scene, Doug's body, and then what they could do through interviewing other people involved.
Detectives begin by conducting a search of the residence Ashley lived in with her mother.
The crime scene technicians recover spent shells in the bedroom. There were 4 shots that were actually fired.
There was a mattress, a hamper, and a backpack. Law enforcement found that in that backpack there was a firearm.
We knew it wasn't the murder weapon because we had the murder weapon. They also found another firearm in the pantry of the kitchen.
It was a red flag for law enforcement that this home was almost emptied, and yet there were 3 firearms.
The fact that there was nothing else in the house seemed to indicate that maybe they were expecting a problem.
One of the firearms belonged to Ashley's mother, and 2 of the firearms belonged to Ashley.
Doug was absolutely unarmed. He had no guns or weapons of any kind on his person. He didn't even have his wallet with him.
He's wearing his flip-flops like he always does. He's wearing a t-shirt. He doesn't have anything on him, nothing to defend himself.
Other aspects of the case are also concerning to investigators.
The fact that a therapist was on the scene within minutes is unheard of.
I received a phone call from Ashley's family law attorney. She asked me to please go over to the house to check on Ashley's mother. She reiterated that her mom had thought that it was Ashley who had been killed. I was absolutely shocked to hear that Doug was the one who had been shot.
Law enforcement started speaking to other law enforcement officers who had dealt with Ashley in the past. They learned that she was less credible than they initially thought she was.
Sheriff's deputies tell detectives about a report Ashley filed in 2017. She was convinced Doug was trying to kill her and the baby.
He sent her a birthday gift, which was tea. She claimed that it smelled funny when she opened the package, and she thought that it may have poison in it.
I contacted the bomb squad and hazmat team that came out to inspect the box and analyze it for what was inside.
Ultimately, they'd find that there was nothing malicious about this package of tea.
Ashley was not happy that law enforcement was not going to arrest Doug.
Investigators are forced to consider whether Ashley's tea poisoning allegations were intended to serve a different purpose.
Looking back at everything, it seemed she was trying to show everybody that he was such a bad person and that he would try to do this to her and the baby. At the conclusion of the interview with her that day, I definitely was left with the impression of there's something going on here on both sides of this. Maybe she's not being 100% truthful.
Coming up, Doug's loved ones cast further doubt on the circumstances of his death.
Doug was being accused of things that were impossible, that he would never, ever in a million years do.
And investigators suspect it might have been a cover-up for murder.
We had a motive. We had a history. We had a pattern of behavior on her part.
Over 48 hours into the investigation of Doug Benefield's shooting death, authorities suspect his wife, Ashley Benefield, has not been telling the truth. However, they need to be certain they aren't jumping to any conclusions.
It complicates matters because there's only other people's understanding for law enforcement to depend on to compare to the allegations Ashley's making.
Doug Benefield's loved ones tell detectives that the man they knew bore no resemblance to the abusive husband Ashley described.
Doug was being accused of things that were impossible, that he would never, ever in a million years do. Doug was a loving man that took care of other people.
All information that I got was a very different picture than one that Ashley had painted.
According to them, Ashley wasn't a victim, she was the problem. Doug's older daughter, Eva, says the tensions in their household started as soon as Ashley moved in.
She said that Ashley would throw tantrums and seemed jealous of Eva. She didn't want Doug to choose Eva over her.
Eva tells investigators that Ashley's jealousy was even more extreme when it came to Eva's mother.
Ashley came in and she wanted to get rid of Renee. She didn't want Renee's pictures. She didn't want Renee's home decor.
Eva also reported to law enforcement Ashley told her she needed to stay away from her father because her father had also killed her mother. Ashley also went as far as contacting law enforcement and trying to get Renee's body exhumed because she was making allegations that Doug had also poisoned Renee.
At the time, South Carolina police had confirmed with the coroner that Renee died of natural causes.
She never stopped doing that on a regular basis. Ashley consistently would accuse Doug of things that many times were not true and were unprovable.
When detectives review the court filings, they find some of Ashley's accusations had a basis in reality. But they were amplified to support her depiction of Doug.
It is clear that Doug did some things that would not be appropriate. Doug, in a deposition, talked about some of these behaviors that she was accusing him of. One of them was punching holes in the walls. He admitted he punched holes in the wall one time in South Carolina.
He also talked about the shooting of the gun into the ceiling. He said he did that out of frustration. He made poor choices and let his emotions get the best of him. But those things not only were separated in time, but still don't warrant Ashley shooting and killing him years later.
Investigators find the timing of the poisoning allegations to be of particular interest.
The spring of 2018, Doug reached out to my law firm to set up an appointment to discuss options for reaching out to Ashley because he and Ashley were getting ready to have their baby. She went into Tampa General Hospital the very next day after she got my email.
Ashley tells the nurses she's been poisoned and that she wants to deliver her baby. She ultimately ends up getting induced and then delivering her daughter.
Ashley not only doesn't put a father down on the birth certificate, she also doesn't give their daughter Doug's name.
Ashley used the alleged poisoning to keep Doug from seeing the child for 6 months until he took her to court.
And the judge, after hearing the evidence, said that there was no evidence that there was any poisoning and that Ashley was not a credible witness. And she ends up giving Doug visitation with his child.
Ultimately, they had to figure out time sharing and work out co-parenting on the weekends.
Over the next 2 years, Ashley responded by taking her accusations to a new level.
Initially, she said he was doing abusive things to her, and then when that didn't work, she changed to abusive behaviors towards the child.
Law enforcement takes domestics very serious. Claims of abuse against children. They investigated these cases to their fullest. We found there was never any evidence that Doug did any crimes against the child.
To investigators, it suggests Ashley was willing to do anything to retain sole custody of their child.
She was hell-bent and was willing to make almost any allegation she could to make that happen.
Was she fearing for her life, or was she executing a thorough plot to start her own life without Doug in the picture now?
Detectives investigating Doug Benefield's death believe Ashley Benefield might be trying to cover up a murder plot years in the making. And when they speak to Doug's attorney, she confirms their suspicions about Ashley's motives.
September 30th, just 3 days after the homicide occurs, there was a hearing scheduled with the family law judge to find out if Doug gets more custody of this child. They were going to go back before this judge who seemingly did not believe anything Ashley said.
She didn't know what else to do. I think it got to that point where she snapped.
I think the T situation was absolutely Ashley's attempt to frame Doug.
She knew that if she could establish a pattern that Doug had killed his first wife, Renee, then it would be logical that he would do the same thing to her.
When there's only one side of the story, it makes it an incredibly tough job to argue self-defense versus homicide.
To prove their case, detectives will need hard evidence.
They took Doug's shirt from the crime scene and analyzed that shirt for any residue from a bullet or gunpowder.
There was no stippling found on either the clothing or the body of Doug Benefield.
Based on the lack of stippling, they were able to determine that the firearm was potentially 6 feet away from his body.
If Doug were coming at Ashley, you would think they would be much closer than 6 feet.
Combined with Doug's autopsy report, the findings paint a clearer picture of what occurred.
The trajectory of the fatal bullet was from the right side of Doug's chest. This likely indicated that he wasn't coming directly at her in the sense of an attack. He was probably turning around, which then put into question whether or not her use of lethal force was actually necessary in that moment.
We would expect to see X, Y, and Z pieces of evidence to indicate that this was truly self-defense. And everything put together really says this doesn't seem like it.
On November 4th, 2020, Ashley is arrested and charged with second-degree murder.
The media dubbed her the Black Swan. She's a beautiful girl who was a ballerina and now is accused of a heinous crime. And it does affect the case.
Ashley's loved ones rally in her defense, and in the days leading up to the trial, an army of supporters march outside the courthouse.
They had bullhorns out there chanting things like "We stand with Ashley" and trying to raise awareness about what was going on.
When the trial begins on July 23, 2024, Ashley's attorneys use those grounds well to their advantage.
The defense made it very clear this was a case of self-defense and that Ashley didn't have a choice but to shoot and kill Doug.
Ashley said on multiple occasions that she was afraid for her safety, that she was afraid for her life.
Our way to combat that is to try and show that we had a motive, we had a history, we had a pattern of behavior on her part.
We were very concerned about alienating a jury or making them think we were picking on Ashley, when in fact we're just trying to show that she's been telling tales.
Ashley is the only one who knows for certain what happened that night. And so far, she's refused to talk. But in a surprising move, she decides to testify in her own defense.
Once Ashley was called to the stand, the entire dynamic of the trial completely shifted. We all kind of knew now it's going to get real.
For the first time since shooting her husband in September 2020, Ashley Benefield breaks her silence. From the stand, she walks the jurors through an emotional account of what happened.
Ashley and her mother were in the process of moving. Doug insisted that he help with the packing.
Ashley says Doug tried to force her to reconcile, and he wouldn't take no for an answer.
He wouldn't let me leave. I tried to leave. He stopped me. He was standing in the doorway. He said, "You're f***ing done."
Ashley says that Doug hit her in the face. This is when Ashley ran to her bedroom.
At that point, when Doug crashes through the bedroom door, what alternative is Ashley Benefield left with? She grabs the gun in an effort to defend herself.
She says that she started pointing the gun at Doug and told him to stop moving towards her. And when he didn't listen to those commands, she says that's when she pulled the trigger.
During cross-examination, prosecutors challenge the details of Ashley's story.
You say he slapped you?
I wouldn't know how to classify it. He struck me, he hit me.
Okay, so he's standing there. He turns to like this and starts moving his arms around. Like that. Well, show me. What was he doing?
It was very clear to us that Ashley's testimony on the stand was performance, not truth.
She would go through the motions of wailing and, convulsing and crying, but I never saw a tear. One of my goals was to get the jury to see that.
During my closing, I talked a lot about Ashley's manipulation, that she attempted to manipulate Doug, she attempted to manipulate law enforcement, she attempted to manipulate the courts.
After a week-long trial, the jury retires to deliberate.
In those moments, you feel the weight of your work. You can't help but think, did I do enough? Did we give enough information to this jury?
6 hours later, they return with a verdict.
The defendant is guilty of manslaughter, a lesser included offense.
The jury coming back with manslaughter, I believe, is an attempt to give some recognition that this was a very difficult case. And I think it was probably the best result to come to justice in the end.
Ashley is sentenced to 20 years in prison. In a press conference afterward, Doug's loved ones address their feelings about the case.
We're thankful that the lesser charge was allowed. We knew we could achieve that. We proved that Doug Benefield was not in the condition or the person they tried to make him out to be.
Any message you'd like to send to Ashley?
We know this was traumatic for her also. No one wins in this case.
The outcome in this case has a significant impact on her daughter because now she's without both of her parents.
There's no replacing Doug Benefield. No one with his creativity, no one with his innovation. It's crushing not to have him around for Eva, for our entire family.
The illusion of domestic perfection frequently serves as a screen for deep psychological currents and interpersonal friction that remain hidden from public view. In quiet, orderly neighborhoods like Lakewood Ranch, Florida, where security and peace of mind are taken for granted, residents often believe they are insulated from the complexities of the outside world. However, security gates and manicured lawns cannot protect individuals from the conflicts that arise within their own homes. When a catastrophic event occurs in such an environment, the primary challenge for law enforcement is rarely identifying the individual responsible for the act. Instead, the investigation must focus on the far more intricate and demanding task of understanding why the tragedy occurred, sorting through years of conflicting narratives, emotional escalations, and carefully constructed personas. This process requires detectives to look past the carefully curated public images of the individuals involved, examining objective physical evidence to separate manufactured claims from the reality of what transpired. The background of the individuals involved in this case provides crucial context for understanding the tragic sequence of events. Doug Benefield was born in October of 1961 and grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, where his father worked for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Raised in a devoutly religious and structured household, he carried these values throughout his life. After completing his education, he pursued a career as a naval flight officer, operating off aircraft carriers during military deployments. Following his honorable service, he transitioned into the private sector, utilizing his entrepreneurial drive to establish a highly successful restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina. He eventually married Renee, a single mother with whom he built a deeply religious family, and together they welcomed their daughter, Eva, in 2001. After 16 years of marriage, Renee passed away unexpectedly from an undiagnosed heart condition, a loss that devastated Doug and brought him even closer to his daughter. The trajectory of Doug Benefield's life changed significantly when he met Ashley Byers in August of 2016 at a political event in West Palm Beach, Florida. Ashley, who was 24 years old at the time, was working as an events coordinator, while Doug was 54 years old. Despite the 30-year age difference, the two found immediate common ground in their shared religious beliefs, political views, and interest in firearms, as both held permits to carry concealed weapons. Ashley, a former professional ballet dancer who had transitioned into modeling after a knee injury, quickly captivated Doug. Their mutual attraction escalated rapidly, leading them to marry in a private ceremony just 13 days after their initial meeting, without the knowledge of Doug's family. Following their marriage, the couple lived a high-profile lifestyle in Charleston, appearing in local publications, attending formal events, and presenting the image of an ideal partnership. The initial success of the marriage began to fracture as the couple embarked on a professional venture to establish a national ballet company, financed by Doug through his investment partners. This project was intended to fulfill Ashley's lifelong dream of leading a prominent dance organization. By the summer of 2017, the company had begun hiring dancers and staff, but the venture quickly faced severe financial difficulties. The necessity of laying off employees and scaling back operations created significant friction within both the business and the marriage. According to subsequent accounts, the relationship rapidly deteriorated, with Ashley accusing Doug of utilizing controlling behaviors, attempting to dictate her social circle, and reacting aggressively to marital disagreements. The tension escalated significantly after Ashley learned she was pregnant, prompting her to obtain a protective order, leave a note ending the marriage, and relocate to Florida to reside with her mother. During their prolonged separation, a series of highly concerning allegations emerged, which investigators later analyzed. To understand the dynamics of the relationship, Ashley claimed that Doug's behavior had escalated to dangerous levels, citing an incident where he discharged a firearm into a ceiling out of frustration, an action Doug later admitted to in legal depositions. Following her relocation to Florida, Ashley asserted that Doug was monitoring her movements using a tracking device on her vehicle. In 2017, she contacted law enforcement to report that a package of tea sent to her by Doug smelled unusual, suggesting it might contain a toxic substance. This claim prompted a full response from hazardous materials and explosives teams, though subsequent testing revealed the package was entirely harmless. Investigators began to suspect that these claims were part of a broader effort to establish a pattern of dangerous behavior against Doug, particularly as the couple engaged in a highly contentious custody battle over their newborn daughter. The custody dispute intensified when Ashley admitted herself to a hospital in Tampa, Florida, in the spring of 2018, claiming she had been poisoned and requesting an early delivery of her baby. Following the birth of their daughter, Ashley omitted Doug's name from the birth certificate and withheld visitation for 6 months until a court intervened. A family court judge subsequently ruled that there was no credible evidence of poisoning and that Ashley's testimony lacked credibility. granting Doug regular visitation rights. In response, Ashley S. allegations escalated to include claims of misconduct regarding their child, which were thoroughly investigated by law enforcement and found to be entirely without merit. Ashley also attempted to have the body of Doug's late wife, Renee, exhumed under the suspicion of poisoning, a claim that was quickly dismissed by authorities based on the original coroner's report confirming natural causes. The situation reached a critical point in September of 2020, as Ashley and her mother prepared to relocate to Maryland to establish a new life. Upon learning of the planned move, Doug obtained employment in Maryland and insisted on joining them to maintain a relationship with his daughter. This development caused immense distress for Ashley, who was actively seeking a legal injunction to terminate Doug's contact with both herself and their child. The psychological pressure culminated as a critical custody hearing was scheduled for September 30th, 2020, just 3 days after the fatal encounter. Legal representatives noted that the upcoming hearing presented a significant risk to Ashley's custody goals, as the presiding judge had previously shown skepticism toward her uncorroborated allegations against Doug. On the evening of September 27th, at approximately 7 in the evening, sheriff's deputies were dispatched to a residence in Lakewood Ranch following an emergency call from a neighbor. The neighbor reported that Ashley had come to his home in an extremely distressed state, stating that she had shot her husband during a domestic dispute and was unsure of his condition. Upon arriving at the scene, deputies located Doug Benefield in a rear bedroom, suffering from wounds to his leg and chest. Despite attempts to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation, Doug succumbed to his injuries before arriving at a medical facility. Ashley's mother, who had been away at a local park with Ashley's daughter during the incident, returned to find a heavy police presence and immediately expressed a belief that Doug had harmed her daughter, reflecting the narrative of fear that had been cultivated within the household. As the investigation began, detectives faced a complex challenge as Ashley exercised her constitutional right to remain silent on the advice of her legal counsel. There were no direct witnesses to the shooting. Investigators had to rely entirely on the physical evidence present at the crime scene and the findings of the medical examiner. A search of the residence revealed that the home was largely packed for the upcoming move. Yet 3 firearms were recovered from the scene, 2 belonging to Ashley and 1 belonging to her mother. Doug was found to be completely unarmed, carrying no weapons or defensive items, and was wearing casual attire, including flip-flops. The presence of multiple firearms in an otherwise cleared home, combined with the rapid arrival of a specialized therapist and legal representatives at the scene, raised immediate questions for the investigating team regarding the premeditated natures of the incident. The forensic analysis of the physical evidence proved to be the most decisive factor in dismantling the claim of self-defense. Technicians analyzing Doug's clothing and body found no evidence of gunpowder residue or stippling, which typically occurs when a firearm is discharged in close proximity to a target. The lack of stippling indicated that the firearm was discharged from a distance of at least 6 feet, contradicting the assertion of a close-quarters physical struggle. Furthermore, the autopsy revealed that the fatal bullet entered the right side of Doug's chest, indicating that he was not facing Ashley directly in an aggressive posture, but was likely turned away at the moment of the discharge. These objective findings, combined with the timing of the upcoming custody hearing, led investigators to conclude that the use of lethal force was not a necessary act of self-defense, resulting in Ashley S. arrest on November 4, 2020, on a charge of second-degree murder. The legal proceedings, which began on July 23, 2024, drew significant public attention, with media outlets referencing the case as the Black Swan trial due to Ashley's background as a ballerina. The defense argued that Ashley was a victim of severe domestic abuse who had acted out of fear for her life when Doug allegedly blocked her exit from the room and struck her during an argument. In a surprising development, Ashley chose to testify in her own defense, providing an emotional account of the confrontation. However, the prosecution challenged her testimony during cross-examination, highlighting the physical inconsistencies between her account and the forensic evidence. The prosecution argued that her emotional display on the stand was a calculated performance, pointing out a lack of genuine tears and emphasizing her history of using false allegations to manipulate the legal system and secure sole custody of her daughter. After a week of testimony, the jury deliberated for approximately 6 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on the lesser-included charge of manslaughter. This verdict suggested that while the jury recognized the high-conflict nature of the relationship, they ultimately found no justification for the use of lethal force. Ashley was subsequently sentenced to 20 years in prison. The outcome of the case highlighted the profound tragedy of the situation, leaving a young child without either parent and causing immense grief for Doug's family, including his older daughter, Eva. The resolution of the case emphasized that in highly contentious domestic disputes, the systematic escalation of conflict and the refusal to utilize peaceful mediation can lead to devastating consequences for everyone involved. Analyzing the underlying motives in this case reveals how the desire for absolute control over a child's life can drive an individual to extreme lengths. In many high-conflict custody disputes, one party may view the other not as a co-parent, but as an obstacle that must be entirely eliminated from the child's life. When legal and administrative avenues fail to produce the desired outcome of total custody, the individual may experience an escalation of panic, leading them to see catastrophic actions as the only remaining option. This psychological state is often fueled by a long-term pattern of confirmation bias, where every minor disagreement or inappropriate behavior by the other party is amplified and documented to build a narrative of severe threat. In this case, the impending custody hearing served as a catalyst, presenting a definitive deadline that forced a confrontation when the legal system refused to validate uncorroborated claims. For law enforcement, this case offers valuable insights into the techniques required to investigate complex domestic incidents where public narratives conflict with physical reality. The most critical tool for detectives is the reliance on objective, scientific evidence that cannot be influenced by emotional appeals or prearranged legal strategies. By focusing on measurable metrics such as bullet trajectories, the presence or absence of gunshot residue, and the precise physical layout of the crime scene, investigators can reconstruct events with high accuracy. Additionally, tracking the timeline of administrative and legal proceedings provides crucial context for identifying the true motives behind sudden escalations of violence. To expedite such investigations, police forces can benefit from specialized training in recognizing the patterns of high-conflict family dynamics and maintaining close coordination with family court systems to share information regarding ongoing disputes. Ultimately, This tragic case offers profound lessons for families and communities regarding the importance of early intervention and the constructive resolution of domestic conflict. When relationships show signs of severe incompatibility and escalating hostility, seeking early, objective mediation and professional psychological support is essential to prevent the accumulation of resentment. Communities must also foster an environment where individuals are encouraged to resolve disputes through transparent, legal, and therapeutic channels, rather than resorting to isolation, mutual surveillance, and the accumulation of personal weapons. By honoring justice, relying on scientific truth, and promoting healthy communication, society can work to ensure that children are protected from the devastating consequences of adult conflicts, allowing the memory of those lost to serve as a call for greater empathy, patience, and peaceful resolution. The human mind often seeks comfort in the quiet order of structured neighborhoods, believing that security gates and manicured lawns can act as a shield against the conflicts of the world. In the private community of Lakewood Ranch, Florida, residents cherished this peace, assuming that safety was a permanent feature of their lives. However, events would soon prove that the most complex dangers do not always come from the outside, but can instead emerge from the very homes where people seek refuge. On the evening of September 27, 2020, at approximately 7 in the evening, this illusion of safety was shattered when emergency dispatchers received a call from an older resident in the neighborhood. The caller, speaking in a highly distressed tone, reported that his neighbor had just arrived at his doorstep in a state of absolute shock, confessing that she had shot her husband and did not know if he was alive or dead. The responding deputy sheriffs quickly identified the woman as Ashley Benefield, who was 28 years of age, and the victim as her estranged husband, Doug Benefield, who was 58 years of age. The couple had been living apart for approximately 3 years, and their relationship had been defined by a long and bitter history of legal disputes, custody battles, and deep personal animosity. At the moment of the emergency call, the mother of Ashley had taken the young daughter of the couple to a nearby park, a routine they followed almost every evening during the summer months. This left Ashley alone to face the immediate consequences of the confrontation. When the neighbor was on the telephone with the emergency dispatcher, he was instructed to tell Ashley to walk out of the house with her hands visible to the arriving deputies. Upon their arrival, the officers observed that she was in a profound state of shock, her mind struggling to process the gravity of what had just occurred. Because Ashley was unable to provide a detailed statement on the scene, the deputies placed her in a patrol vehicle for her own safety and entered the residence to locate Doug. In a back bedroom, they discovered him lying semi-conscious on the floor. He had sustained 2 gunshot wounds, one to his right leg and another to his upper right chest. The deputies immediately cut his shirt to assess the injuries, performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation in a desperate bid to save his life. Despite their efforts, Doug passed away before the emergency transport could reach the hospital. This tragic outcome transformed the domestic dispute into a homicide investigation. For the detectives of the Manatee County Sheriff Office, the question was never about who had pulled the trigger, as Ashley had already identified herself as the shooter. Instead, the central challenge of the case was to uncover the complex reasons behind the shooting, sorting through years of allegations, legal maneuvers, and psychological conflict to determine whether this was an act of genuine self-defense or a calculated act of violence. To understand how this relationship reached such a tragic end, investigators had to look back at the life of Doug Benefield. Born on October 2, 1961, Doug grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, where his father worked for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Raised in a devout military family, he attended church regularly, which instilled in him a deep religious faith that would guide his choices throughout his life. After graduating from Texas Agricultural and Mechanical University, Doug enlisted in the United States Navy, serving as a flight officer on aircraft carriers during the conflict known as Desert Storm, and completing 2 deployments. Following his honorable retirement from active duty in 1999, he remained in the Navy Reserves and turned his attention to business. He moved to Charleston, South Carolina, where he successfully launched a restaurant that became highly popular in the newly restored downtown area. Despite his professional success, Doug deeply desired a family of his own. He eventually met Renee, a single mother raising 2 boys, who shared his strong Christian values and intellectual interests. The two were married within the year, and in 2001, their daughter Eva was born. For 16 years, the family lived in relative harmony until tragedy struck when Renee passed away suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition. The loss of his wife was a devastating blow to Doug, causing him to lean even more heavily on his religious faith and drawing him closer to his daughter Eva. For a long time, Doug did not seek another relationship, focusing instead on raising his daughter and managing his business interests. However, in August of 2016, the life of Doug took a dramatic turn when he attended a political campaign event in West Palm Beach, Florida. At this event, he met Ashley Byers, a 24-year-old volunteer who was working as an events coordinator for the campaign. Despite the 30-year age gap between them, they quickly discovered that they shared many common interests, including a strong devotion to their Christian faith, conservative political views, and an active interest in firearms. Both were concealed carry permit holders, and on the very night they met, Ashley was carrying a weapon in the presence of the United States Secret Service. Doug was immediately captivated by her beauty, intelligence, and charm, while Ashley was drawn to his apparent maturity, stability, and shared values. Their mutual attraction was so intense that they decided to marry in a private ceremony just 13 days after their initial meeting, keeping the wedding a secret from the family of Doug to avoid any potential objections. Following their sudden marriage, Ashley left the political campaign and moved to Charleston to begin her new life with Doug. To those on the outside, they appeared to be a highly successful and glamorous couple, traveling frequently, attending high-profile social functions, and even appearing in lifestyle magazines. Ashley, who had been a passionate ballet dancer in her youth before a knee injury ended her professional career, still dreamed of contributing to the world of dance. To help her realize this dream, Doug used his business connections and funding from his investment partners to establish a new national ballet company. In the summer of 2017, they began hiring professional dancers and staff, presenting themselves as major patrons of the arts. However, the rapid success of the couple was short-lived. The ballet company quickly encountered severe financial difficulties, leading to budget shortfalls and the laying off of several dancers. As the business began to crumble, the pressure began to take a heavy toll on their marriage. According to the therapist of Ashley, Dr. Barbara Russell, who would later speak Ve Kep in Te Hot investigators, the relationship deteriorated into a cycle of conflict. Ashley claimed that Doug became increasingly controlling, attempting to dictate her choice of friends, her wardrobe, and her daily activities. The situation escalated further when Ashley became pregnant in late 2017. Instead of bringing the couple closer together, the pregnancy seemed to increase the tension, culminating in an incident where Doug, in a fit of extreme frustration, discharged a handgun into the ceiling of their home. Fearing for her safety and the well-being of her unborn child, Ashley decided to end the marriage. She obtained a protective order against Doug, left him a separation note, and moved to Florida to live with her mother. Doug, however, refused to accept the separation. He relocated to Florida to be near her, leading to a prolonged and bitter conflict that played out in family courts for the next 3 years. Ashley consistently sought sole custody of their daughter, while Doug fought for visitation rights. To escape his constant presence and the tracking devices he had allegedly placed on her vehicle, Ashley and her mother began planning a move to the state of Maryland. When Doug learned of this plan, he secured a job in Maryland and insisted on joining them, which only heightened the fear of Ashley. As the detectives investigated the scene of the shooting, they began to uncover details that challenged the narrative of self-defense. In the residence where Ashley lived with her mother, which was almost completely packed for the move to Maryland, technicians recovered 4 spent shell casings from the bedroom. They discovered that Ashley possessed 2 firearms, one of which was found in a backpack, while a third firearm belonging to her mother was located in the kitchen pantry. Doug was completely unarmed at the time of his death, wearing only a t-shirt and flip-flops, and did not even have his wallet in his possession. Furthermore, investigators found it highly unusual that the family law attorney of Ashley had contacted Dr. Russell, the therapist, to come to the scene within minutes of the shooting, suggesting that the defense strategy was being coordinated almost immediately. As investigators spoke with other law enforcement agencies, they discovered that Ashley had a history of making serious allegations against Doug that could not be verified. In 2017, she had filed a report claiming that Doug had sent her a package of tea that smelled unusual, which she believed was an attempt to poison her. A full investigation by the Hazardous Materials and Bomb Squad units revealed that the tea was entirely harmless. In 2018, on the day after Doug had scheduled an appointment with his attorney to establish paternity and custody rights, Ashley admitted herself to a hospital in Tampa, claiming she had been poisoned and demanding that her labor be induced. She subsequently left the name of Doug off the birth certificate and used the allegations of poisoning to deny him access to the child for 6 months. A family court judge eventually ruled that there was no evidence of poisoning and granted Doug visitation, noting that Ashley was not a highly credible witness. This pattern of behavior led detectives to suspect that the allegations of abuse were part of a systematic effort by Ashley to deny Doug custody of their daughter. This suspicion was reinforced when they learned that a major custody hearing had been scheduled for September 30, 2020, just 3 days after the shooting. At this hearing, the family court judge was expected to consider granting Doug expanded custody rights. With her legal options running out, investigators believed that Ashley had reached a point of desperation and decided to take matters into her own hands. The physical evidence from the crime scene ultimately provided the most critical clues for the prosecution. Forensic analysis of the shirt Doug was wearing revealed an absolute lack of stippling, which is the pattern of gunpowder residue, left on a surface when a firearm is discharged at close range. This lack of residue indicated that the firearm was at least 6 feet away from Doug when it was fired. Additionally, the autopsy report revealed that the fatal bullet entered the right side of his chest, suggesting that he was not facing Ashley in an aggressive posture, but was instead turning away from her at the moment of the discharge. This evidence directly contradicted the claim of Ashley that she had shot him at close range, while he was actively advancing on her in an aggressive manner. On November 4, 2020, Ashley was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The media quickly labeled the case as the Black Swan trial, drawing parallels between her past as a ballerina and the complex nature of the allegations. The trial began on July 23, 2024, and drew significant public attention, with supporters of both sides gathering outside the courthouse. In a surprising move, Ashley chose to testify in her own defense. Presenting a highly emotional account of the evening, she claimed that Doug had blocked her from leaving the bedroom, struck her in the face, and threatened her, leaving her with no choice but to use lethal force to protect herself. During a rigorous cross-examination, the prosecution challenged the physical consistency of her story, pointing out the lack of injuries on her face and the scientific evidence regarding the distance of the shooter and the trajectory of the bullet. The prosecutor argued that her emotional display on the stand was a calculated performance rather than a truthful recollection, pointing to her history of using false allegations to manipulate the legal system, law enforcement, and Doug himself. After a week of testimony and approximately 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of manslaughter, finding her guilty of a lesser offense than second-degree murder. Ashley was subsequently sentenced to 20 years in prison. This tragic case offers several profound lessons for communities and individuals alike. It highlights the devastating consequences of hot conflict, custody disputes, and the importance of addressing domestic discord through peaceful, transparent, and legal means. For law enforcement, the case underscores the critical value of objective forensic science, such as bullet trajectory analysis and gunpowder residue testing, in uncovering the truth when there are no independent eyewitnesses. Ultimately, the resolution of the case brought a measure of justice for the family of Doug, while serving as a sobering reminder of the human cost of unresolved conflict and manipulation, leaving a young daughter to grow up without either of her parents. In the quiet, manicured streets of upscale neighborhoods across the nation, there exists an unspoken expectation of safety and predictability. Places like Lakewood Ranch, Florida, are designed to be sanctuaries, built with security gates and pristine lawns to keep the chaotic dangers of the outer world at bay. Yet, history repeatedly teaches us that the thickest walls and the most sophisticated security systems are entirely powerless against the conflicts that breed within our own homes. The tragedy of human relationships is that the most profound dangers do not always arrive from the outside as masked intruders, but can instead sit across from us at the dinner table, smiling under the guise of shared affection and common dreams. When a relationship deteriorates into a battleground, the home itself can become a theater of carefully constructed illusions, where the line between victim and perpetrator is blurred by theatrical narratives and calculated manipulation. To understand how these domestic tragedies occur, we must look far beyond the physical act of violence and examine the deep, underlying psychological motives, the systemic loopholes that desperate individuals seek to exploit, and the relentless quest of law enforcement to uncover the objective truth amidst a sea of fabricated fiction. Domestic tragedies of this nature are rarely sudden, spontaneous explosions of anger. Instead, they are almost always the culmination of a long, slow burn, often fueled by a pathological desire for absolute control. In many high-profile cases, the central motive is not money or passion, but the custody of a child, which becomes the ultimate prize in an all-or-nothing game of domestic dominance mod high. When two individuals separate, the shared child can unfortunately be viewed by a manipulative partner not as a human being to be co-parented with love, but as a biological possession that must be retained at all costs. To achieve this absolute ownership, the manipulating party often realizes that they cannot win on merit alone, especially when faced with objective family court judges who prioritize shared parenting. Consequently, they resort to a highly sophisticated and devastating strategy: the systematic dismantling of their partner's character. By utilizing every available legal and therapeutic resource, they attempt to construct an elaborate paper trail of abuse, hoping that a continuous stream of unverified allegations will eventually convince the authorities that their spouse is too dangerous to be allowed near the child. This weaponization of institutional support systems is a modern phenomenon that occurs with alarming frequency, transforming courts of protection into tools of personal vendetta. These cases occur with such tragic frequency because the systems designed to protect the vulnerable are, by their very nature, built on trust and the assumption of good faith. When a distressed individual approaches a therapist, a social worker, or a police officer with allegations of physical or emotional abuse, the immediate response of these professionals is to offer support, shelter, and legal intervention. This is a vital and necessary function of a compassionate society. However, a calculating mind can easily exploit this compassionate bias, realizing that an allegation made within the sanctity of a therapist's office or a protective filing is rarely subjected to rigorous cross-examination in its initial stages. Over time, these unverified reports accumulate, creating a superficial history of conflict that the perpetrator can later point to as proof of their ongoing victimization. The tragedy of this loop is that it creates a false sense of security for the manipulator, who begins to believe that they are successfully orchestrating a perfect plot. They rely on the empathy of others to shield themselves from accountability, unaware that the physical world possesses its own immutable laws that cannot be manipulated by clever legal filings or emotional performances. When the illusion eventually shatters and a physical confrontation occurs, the task of the police and forensic investigators is to step into this highly polarized environment and perform a clinical, entirely objective analysis of the physical evidence. Detectives are trained to understand that while human beings can lie, manipulate, and present highly polished theatrical performances, the physical evidence at a crime scene is entirely incapable of deception. In cases where a suspect claims self-defense, investigators rely on several critical scientific details to reconstruct the final moments of the encounter. One of the most important clues is the presence or absence of stippling, which refers to the tiny pinpoint burns and gunpowder deposits left on a victim's skin or clothing when a firearm is discharged at close range. If a suspect claims that they were being physically assaulted or charged at by an aggressive attacker, the laws of physics dictate that the weapon must have been fired from very close proximity, which would inevitably leave abundant stippling. When forensic analysts find absolutely no stippling on the victim's clothing or body, they can scientifically determine that the firearm was discharged from a significant distance, often 6 feet or more, immediately casting doubt on the claim of an imminent physical attack. In addition to stippling, the trajectory of the bullet provides an undeniable story of the physical orientation of the individuals involved. Forensic pathologists and ballistics experts meticulously calculate the angle at which the projectile entered the body, mapping its path through tissue and bone. If the fatal bullet enters from the side or the back of the body, it strongly indicates that the victim was not moving directly toward the shooter in an aggressive posture, but was instead turning away, retreating, or standing in a non-threatening position. This scientific revelation is often the turning point in an investigation, as it completely undermines the suspect's narrative of acting out of a desperate, split-second fear for their life. Furthermore, investigators examine the broader physical context of the home, noting the presence of other weapons, the lack of defensive wounds on the suspect, and the general state of the environment. A home that is almost completely packed for a move, yet contains multiple strategically placed firearms, suggests a level of preparation and expectation of conflict that is highly inconsistent with a sudden, spontaneous act of self-defense. By combining these physical facts with a rigorous analysis of the suspect's history, detectives can begin to separate carefully constructed fiction from the cold, hard reality of the event. There is a profound and almost tragic irony in the way highly sophisticated criminals eventually bring about their own downfall. These individuals often spend years constructing what they believe to be an airtight plan, meticulously filing reports, consulting specialized therapists, and dropping subtle hints of victimization to anyone who will listen. They believe that by creating an overwhelming paper trail, they can preemptively justify any future actions they might take. Yet, in their obsession with manipulating the social and legal systems, they utterly fail to account for the simplicity of physical science. They might arrange for a high-priced therapist to arrive at the scene within minutes of a tragedy, or they might coordinate with family law attorneys beforehand. But they cannot alter the path of a bullet or erase the absence of gunpowder residue on a cotton shirt. Their very sophistication becomes a trap of their own making. The sheer speed they kepte, hot, which their legal and therapeutic allies appear on the scene, raises immediate red flags for experienced detectives who recognize that such rapid coordination is highly unnatural in the immediate aftermath of a genuine, shocking tragedy. The elaborate structure they built to protect themselves eventually collapses under the weight of its own complexity, proving that the truth has a quiet, relentless way of asserting itself. Drawing profound life lessons from these tragic events is essential if we are to prevent similar occurrences in the future. The first and most critical lesson is the danger of rushing into lifetime commitments based on superficial alignments or short-term infatuation. True compatibility, shared values, and emotional stability cannot be accurately assessed in a matter of weeks, no matter how intense the initial attraction may be. When individuals marry in haste, they often bypass the crucial period of mutual discovery, during which character, temperament, and conflict resolution skills are truly tested. Communities must also learn to recognize the red flags of toxic relationship dynamics, particularly the tendency of one partner to use control tactics, isolate their spouse from family and friends, or engage in continuous, unverified accusations. We must foster a societal culture that prioritizes healthy, transparent communication and encourages individuals to seek professional, objective mediation long before conflicts reach a boiling point. Most importantly, we must protect children from being used as pawns in parental disputes, ensuring that their well-being is never sacrificed at the altar of adult pride and the desire for personal victory. To catch perpetrators faster and prevent these complex cases from dragging on for years, law enforcement and the justice system can benefit from several strategic experiences. First, there must be a seamless, rapid communication network between different jurisdictions, particularly when individuals move across state lines during highly contentious divorces. When a suspect has a history of filing dramatic, unverified reports of poisonings or extreme abuse in one state, that information must be immediately accessible to deputies and family court judges in another state. By maintaining a centralized, cross-referenced database of domestic filings, authorities can quickly identify patterns of systemic manipulation and prevent individuals from restarting their fabricated narratives with a clean slate in a new community. Additionally, investigators must prioritize early, rigorous physical forensics in any domestic shooting, treating the scene with the highest level of clinical scrutiny from the very first hour. By immediately securing ballistics, analyzing gunshot residue, and performing detailed wound trajectory assessments, the police can quickly cut through the emotional performances and legal defenses that often delay justice in high-profile cases. To fully appreciate the gravity of these principles, we must examine the complete, detailed history of a case that captivated the nation and serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of institutional manipulation and domestic tragedy. The story begins with the life of Douglas Benefield, a man born on October 2, 1961, in Palo Alto, California, who grew up in the military and scientific community of Huntsville, Alabama Moat. His father was a dedicated professional working for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, contributing to project development during the height of the space age, while his mother, Suzanne, was a stay-at-home mother who raised Douglas with strong traditional values. The family was deeply involved in their local church, attending services almost every Sunday, an experience that left a profound lifelong imprint on Douglas' character and personal faith. After completing high school in Alabama, Douglas pursued his higher education at Texas Agricultural and Mechanical University, initially planning to go on to medical school. The United States Navy offered to sponsor his medical education, but after enlisting, his career took a different, highly adventurous turn. He became a naval flight officer, operating off aircraft carriers during the conflict known as Desert Storm, and completed 2 major deployments before retiring from active service in 1999, while remaining in the Navy Reserves. Upon transitioning to civilian life, Douglas used his drive and family connections to become an entrepreneur, drawn to the historic renovations and cultural revival occurring in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. He decided to open a restaurant, which quickly became a highly successful enterprise, establishing him as a respected member of the local business community. Despite his professional accomplishments, Douglas deeply desired a family of his own, a wish that was fulfilled when he met a single mother named Renee at a local Irish pub. Renee, who was raising 2 young boys on her own, was a highly intelligent college graduate and a strong practicing Christian, qualities that immediately attracted Douglas. They were married the same year they met, and 2 years later, in 2001, their daughter Eva was born. For 16 years, Douglas and Renee built a beautiful, faith-filled life together, dedicated to raising their children and serving their community. However, this idyllic life was shattered when Renee tragically and suddenly passed away due to an undiagnosed heart condition. The loss of his beloved wife was a devastating blow to Douglas, causing him to lean even more heavily on his faith and creating an incredibly close, unbreakable bond between him and his young daughter, Eva, who relied on her father for comfort and stability during their shared grief. For a long time, the last thing on Douglas' mind was pursuing another romantic relationship, as he was entirely focused on his business ventures and being a dedicated father to Eva. However, in August of 2016, his life took a dramatic turn when he attended a political event in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Douglas.
Investment partners and their political action committee had decided to support the presidential campaign of Donald Trump, and Douglas was invited to attend a high-profile candidate rally. At the event, he met a beautiful 24-year-old volunteer named Ashley Byers, who was working as the event's coordinator on the campaign staff. Although Douglas was 54 years old at the time, creating a 30-year age difference between them, they immediately found a wealth of shared interests and beliefs. They bonded deeply over their conservative political views, their faith-based approach to life, and their mutual passion for firearms, as both of them were concealed carry permit holders. In fact, on the very first night they met, Ashley was carrying a concealed weapon in front of the Secret Service detail, a detail that intrigued and attracted Douglas, who perceived her as a strong, independent woman who shared his values and worldview. As they spent the evening talking, Douglas learned that Ashley's background was as unique as his own. Her first and greatest love had always been classical ballet, a discipline she began practicing at a very young age with immense dedication. She had danced professionally with a company after high school, continuing until her early 20s, when a severe knee injury forced her to retire from the stage. She then transitioned into swimsuit modeling and eventually became involved in political volunteering after attending a campaign event with her mother at the Robarts Arena in Sarasota, where Donald Trump had personally noticed her in the crowd and hired her to join his staff. Ashley possessed a warm, highly engaging personality that allowed her to excel in her role as an events coordinator, and Douglas was immediately smitten by her charm and beauty. The attraction was entirely mutual, with Ashley drawn to Douglas' perceived maturity, stability, and clear sense of purpose. Their relationship quickly escalated into a mutual obsession, and just 13 days after their initial meeting at the political rally, they were married in a private, quiet ceremony. Douglas chose not to inform his family or his daughter, Eva, about the sudden marriage, knowing that they would have deeply questioned the haste of the union and attempted to stop him from making such a rapid commitment. Following their private wedding, Ashley left the campaign trail to join Douglas in Charleston, South Carolina, where they began their new life together. To the outside world, they appeared to be a highly successful, glamorous couple, frequently traveling, attending high-profile social functions, dressing in elegant attire, and even being featured in local magazines. Ashley's lifelong dream had always been to establish a national ballet company, and Douglas, eager to make his new wife's dreams a reality, used his entrepreneurial skills and connections with investment partners to secure the funding necessary to create this major artistic enterprise. In the summer of 2017, the couple began hiring professional dancers and staff from across the country, building a highly publicized organization that seemed destined for success. However, the complex reality of managing a professional ballet company quickly caught up with them. The enterprise began to experience severe financial difficulties, leading to sudden layoffs of dancers and staff, and the highly anticipated ballet company began to crumble before it ever truly took flight. As the business deteriorated, the intense pressure began to take a heavy toll on their marriage, and the initial infatuation between Douglas and Ashley rapidly faded into frequent, bitter arguments. According to subsequent accounts, the dynamic within the home became increasingly hostile, with Ashley claiming that Douglas began to exhibit highly controlling and aggressive behaviors. She alleged that he attempted to dictate her friendships, control her wardrobe, and monitor her movements. The tension escalated dramatically after Ashley learned she was pregnant, a time when she had hoped Douglas would become more gentle and supportive. Instead, she claimed his frustration erupted in outbursts of anger, including an incident where he punched a hole in a wall out of frustration, and another highly distressing occasion where he discharged a handgun into the ceiling during a domestic dispute. Fearing for her safety and the well-being of her unborn child, Ashley decided to end the marriage. She obtained a temporary protective order against Douglas in South Carolina, left him a brief note explaining her departure, and fled to Lakewood Ranch, Florida, to live with her mother, Alicia Ba. Douglas, however, was entirely unable to accept the sudden end of his marriage and the separation from his unborn child. He followed her to Florida, attempting to maintain a presence in her life and desperately seeking to reconcile the relationship. In Florida, Ashley spent the next 3 years engaged in a relentless series of legal battles in family court, seeking to finalize their divorce and secure absolute sole custody of their daughter, who was born in 2018. Douglas, determined to be an active, loving father, refused to go away, renting properties in Florida and continuing his legal fight for visitation and co-parenting rights. Ashley's anxiety and fear grew as Douglas became more persistent, and she accused him of placing a tracking device on her vehicle to monitor her daily movements, claiming she frequently saw him in her rearview mirror while driving. As the custody battle intensified, Ashley's allegations against Douglas reached extraordinary heights. In 2017, she filed a formal report with sheriff's deputies, claiming that a package of tea Douglas had sent her as a birthday gift was poisoned. She asserted that the package smelled highly unusual and that she believed he was actively attempting to end her life. Law enforcement took the allegation with the utmost seriousness, dispatching a hazardous materials team and a bomb squad to analyze the tea, only to discover that there was absolutely nothing harmful or malicious about the package, leading investigators to suspect that Ashley was intentionally fabricating stories to paint Douglas as a dangerous criminal. This pattern of dramatic, unprovable allegations continued in the spring of 2018, when Douglas sought legal assistance to establish visitation rights as the birth of their daughter approached. The day after Douglas' attorney reached out to Ashley to discuss options for co-parenting, Ashley checked herself into Tampa General Hospital, claiming to medical staff that she had been systematically poisoned by Douglas and demanding that her labor be induced immediately to protect the baby. She successfully gave birth to her daughter, but left Douglas' name entirely off the birth certificate and did not give the child his last name, utilizing the poisoning allegation to successfully keep Douglas from seeing his daughter for the first 6 months of her life. When the matter finally went before a family court judge, The court reviewed the medical evidence and concluded that there was absolutely no proof of any poisoning, finding Ashley to be a highly non-credible witness and granting Douglas regular visitation rights. Refusing to accept this outcome, Ashley responded over the next 2 years by escalating her accusations, shifting her claims from personal abuse to alleging that Douglas was actively harming their young daughter, triggers that prompted extensive investigations by Child Protective Services and law enforcement, all of which ultimately found no evidence of any wrongdoing by Douglas. As the year 2020 progressed, the situation reached a critical breaking point. Mort. To escape the ongoing conflict, Ashley and her mother began planning a permanent move to Maryland, hoping to establish a new life far away from Douglas Reach Bond. However, when Douglas learned of the planned move, he used his business connections to secure a job in Maryland, insisting that he would relocate as well to remain close to his daughter and continue his visitation schedule. Boom. Fearing that she would never be free of him, Ashley consulted with her legal team about obtaining an injunction to completely block Douglas access to both her and the child. Meanwhile, a critical family court hearing was scheduled for September 30th, 2020, where a judge was set to determine if Douglas would be granted significantly more custody and unsupervised visitation with his daughter. Realizing that the courts were increasingly seeing through her fabrications and that she was on the verge of losing absolute control over her child, Ashley's desperation peaked on September 27, 2020. Just 3 days before the crucial custody hearing, Douglas arrived at the Lakewood Ranch home of Ashley's mother to help pack boxes for the upcoming move, a gesture that was characteristic of his ongoing efforts to placate Ashley and maintain a cooperative relationship. Mott Boone. At approximately 7 o'clock in the evening, the quiet of the neighborhood was shattered when a neighbor received a frantic knock on his door. Mott, deeply distressed, Ashley Benefield had run to his house, claiming that Douglas had attacked her and that she had shot him in self-defense. Nam. The neighbor immediately dialed the 911 emergency dispatch, informing the operator that a domestic disturbance had occurred and that his neighbor had just shot her estranged husband, identifying the shooter as 28-year-old Ashley Benefield and the victim as 58-year-old Douglas Benefield Mort. The neighbor expressed immense concern that Douglas might come to his door next, unaware of the severity of the wounds. The operator instructed the neighbor to tell Ashley to walk out of the house with her hands up when the deputies arrived, which she did, appearing to be in a state of absolute shock. When sheriff's deputies arrived at the scene, Ashley was unable to provide a detailed statement of what had transpired, leading officers to place her in a patrol vehicle while they entered the home to locate Douglas. They found him in a back bedroom, semi-conscious and suffering from a gunshot wound to his right leg and another to his upper right chest. Mott. Deputies immediately cut off his shirt and performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation in a desperate bid to save his life. But Douglas passed away shortly after arriving at a nearby hospital. Moat. From the very beginning of the investigation, the circumstances surrounding the shooting raised significant red flags for the responding detectives. Within minutes of the incident, before deputies had even fully secured the crime scene, Ashley's family law attorneys and a mental health therapist specializing in domestic violence arrived at the house, having been contacted by Ashley's mother while she was returning with the couple's young daughter from a local park. Nam. The extraordinary speed with which these professional allies appeared on the scene suggested to investigators a level of preparation and coordination that was highly unnatural for a sudden, unexpected tragedy. Ashley, acting on the advice of her legal counsel, invoked her right to remain silent and refused to provide any statement regarding the details of the shooting motte. This forced detectives to rely entirely on the physical evidence within the home, the findings of the autopsy, and the complex history of the couple's legal disputes. A search of the residence revealed that while the home was almost completely emptied of furniture and personal belongings in preparation for the move, there were 3 separate firearms recovered from the premises, 2 belonging to Ashley and 1 belonging to her mother. In stark contrast, Douglas was found to be completely unarmed, wearing only a t-shirt and his signature flip-flops, with no weapons, tools, or even his wallet on his person. As forensic technicians meticulously analyzed the crime scene and Douglas' body, the physical evidence began to directly contradict any narrative of self-defense or an imminent physical attack. Analysts examined the t-shirt Douglas was wearing at the time of the shooting, looking for any signs of stippling or gunpowder residue that would indicate a close-range discharge. They found absolutely no stippling on either the clothing or his body, a scientific fact that allowed ballistics experts to determine that the firearm was discharged from a distance of at least 6 feet away. This was a devastating blow to the defense's eventual claims, as a distance of 6 feet made it highly improbable that Douglas was in the process of physically assaulting or grabbing Ashley when the shots were fired. Furthermore, the autopsy report revealed that the fatal bullet had entered the right side of Douglas' chest, traveling at an angle that indicated he was not facing Ashley directly in an aggressive, attacking posture, but was instead in the process of turning away from her. This physical trajectory strongly suggested that the use of lethal force was entirely unnecessary, and that Douglas was likely attempting to retreat or de-escalate the situation when Ashley pulled the trigger. Armed with these scientific findings, detectives began to systematically review Ashley's historical allegations against Douglas. Speaking with law enforcement officers in South Carolina and Florida, who had previously investigated her claims, they quickly discovered a consistent pattern of unsubstantiated and highly dramatic reports designed to paint Douglas as a monster. The hazmat and bomb squad reports regarding the poisoned tea gift confirmed that her claims were entirely baseless, representing a clear attempt to frame Douglas. Investigators also looked into the shocking allegations Ashley had made to Douglas's teenage daughter, Eva, claiming that Douglas had poisoned his first wife, Renee. Detectives contacted the coroner in South Carolina, who firmly reconfirmed that Renee had passed away due to natural cardiovascular causes, completely debunking Ashley's attempts to have the body exhumed and expose Douglas as a serial poisoner. It became increasingly clear to investigators that Ashley had spent years constructing a fabricated narrative of extreme victimization. And when the family courts refused to believe her lies and threatened to grant Douglas shared custody of their daughter, she realized her elaborate scheme had failed, leading her to execute a final permanent solution to ensure she would never have to share her child. Hi. On November 4th, 2020, following a thorough and exhaustive investigation, the Manatee County Sheriff's Office arrested Ashley Benefield and charged her with second-degree murder-mort. The case quickly captured the intense interest of the national media, which dubbed her the Black Swan, a reference to her past career as a professional ballerina, and the dark, manipulative nature of the allegations against her, Mott Ba. An army of supporters, fueled by the complex narratives of domestic abuse presented by her defense team, rallied outside the courthouse, chanting slogans and attempting to raise public awareness in her favor. However, the prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney Suzanne O'Donnell, remained focused on the cold, hard physical evidence, preparing a powerful case designed to show that the shooting was not an act of self-defense, but rather the planned culmination of a multi-year custody dispute that Ashley was determined to win at all costs. The highly anticipated trial finally began. On June 23, 2024, drawing spectators and media outlets from across the country. The defense team, led by attorney Neil Taylor, argued passionately that Ashley was a classic victim of severe domestic abuse, who had been pushed to her absolute limit, claiming she shot Douglas in a state of pure terror after he physically assaulted her inside the home. In a highly dramatic and surprising move, Ashley decided to take the witness stand to testify in her own defense, breaking her long silence and walking the jurors through an emotional, tearful account of the evening of September 27th, 2020 highs. She claimed that Douglas had refused to let her leave the room, standing in the doorway and striking her in the face before crashing through her bedroom door, leaving her with no choice but to grab her firearm and shoot him to protect her life. However, during a devastating cross-examination, the prosecution systematically dismantled her performance. The state attorney challenged the physical consistency of her story, asking her to demonstrate Douglas movements, and pointing out that her claims of being struck in the face were entirely unsupported by any physical injuries, bruises, or medical records from the night of the shooting. The prosecution highlighted the complete lack of stippling and the bullet trajectory, proving to the jury that Douglas was turning away from her at a distance of 6 feet when she fired the fatal shots. In her closing arguments, Assistant State Attorney Suzanne O'Donnell emphasized that Ashley was a master manipulator who had spent years attempting to deceive law enforcement, the therapeutic community, and the family courts, and that the shooting was a calculated act to eliminate Douglas from their daughter's life before the impending custody hearing. After a week of intense testimony and arguments, the jury retired to deliberate, carrying the immense responsibility of delivering justice for Douglas Benefield and his surviving family. After 6 hours of careful deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, finding Ashley Benefield guilty of the lesser-included offense of manslaughter with a firearm, a decision that recognized the immense complexity of the case while firmly rejecting her claims of justifiable self-defense. On December 3, 2024, a Manatee County judge sentenced Ashley to 20 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation, bringing a close to a tragic chapter that had devastated multiple families. At the sentencing hearing, Douglas' daughter, Eva, delivered a powerful victim impact statement, reminding the court of her father's immense kindness, generosity, and dedication to his family, qualities that had ultimately cost him his life. The legacy of this tragic case serves as a profound warning to communities everywhere about the devastating consequences of domestic manipulation and the weaponization of protective institutions. It honors the absolute dedication of the law enforcement officers and forensic scientists who refuse to be swayed by theatrical narratives, relying instead on the quiet, undeniable truth of physical science to deliver justice. While no legal outcome can ever replace the loss of Douglas Benefield, a man remembered for his creativity, patriotism, and love for his children, The ultimate victory of truth over deception offers a powerful reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, will always prevail in the end. In the quiet, manicured lanes of gated communities, there is often an unspoken assumption that security gates and neighborhood watches can keep out the chaotic elements of the world. Lakewood Ranch, Florida, was long considered one of these modern sanctuaries, a place where manicured lawns and quiet evenings promised safety and peace. Yet history frequently reminds us that the thin veneer of external security cannot protect individuals from the conflicts brewing within their own walls. On a warm late September evening in the year 2020, this illusion of suburban tranquility was shattered by a domestic disturbance that would eventually capture national attention and expose a web of complex personal dynamics, psychological manipulation, and a tragic end to a highly public marriage. At approximately 7 p.m. on September 27th, the peace of this Florida neighborhood was broken when a local resident made an urgent call to the 911 dispatch system. The caller, an older gentleman, reported that his young neighbor had just arrived at his house in a state of extreme distress, claiming she had been forced to shoot her husband during an altercation. The caller identified the distressed woman as 28-year-old Ashley Benefield and noted that the husband she had shot was 58-year-old Doug Benefield, from whom she had been estranged for some time. There was no mystery regarding the identity of the person who had pulled the trigger. Instead, the unfolding investigation would center entirely on the far more complicated question of why this tragic event had occurred, and whether it was an act of genuine self-defense or the culmination of a highly calculated personal campaign. When sheriff deputies arrived at the suburban home, they found a scene that was both quiet and deeply unsettling. Ashley has already been taken by her mother to a nearby park, a routine the family reportedly followed every summer evening. Upon instructions from dispatch, Ashley returned to meet the arriving deputies with her hands raised, appearing to be in a profound state of shock. Unable to provide a coherent statement regarding the immediate events that led to the discharge of the firearm, she was placed in the back of a patrol vehicle, while law enforcement officers entered the residence to search for her husband. Inside a rear bedroom, they discovered Doug Benefield semi-conscious on the floor. He had sustained 2 gunshot wounds, one to his leg and another to the upper right side of his chest. Despite the immediate efforts of emergency personnel to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation and administer life-saving care, Doug succumbed to his injuries before he could reach the hospital. The initial assessment by responding officers suggested a domestic dispute that had tragically escalated to a fatal end. However, as investigators began to peel back the layers of the couple's history, they quickly realized they were dealing with a relationship marked by extreme high-profile public success and deep private turmoil. To understand how a couple who once graced the pages of glossy magazines and attended high society events ended up in such a tragic situation, investigators had to delve into the backgrounds of both individuals. Doug Benefield was born on October 2, 1961, in Huntsville, Alabama, where his father worked as a developer for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Raised in a devoutly religious and structured military household, Doug attended church regularly, an upbringing that deeply influenced his values throughout his life. After finishing high school and pursuing his higher education at Texas Agricultural and Mechanical University, he had initially intended to study medicine. However, his life took a different path when he enlisted in the United States Navy, serving as a naval flight officer operating off aircraft carriers during Operation Desert Storm. Following his honorable discharge from active service in 1999, Doug transitioned into civilian life as an energetic entrepreneur. He became highly active in the historic restoration and business community of Charleston, South Carolina, where he opened a restaurant that achieved significant local success. Despite his professional achievements, Doug's personal life had experienced profound tragedy. He had met his first wife, Renee, at an Irish pub, and the two quickly bonded over their shared commitment to their Christian faith. Together they built a life and welcomed their daughter, Eva, in the year 2001. Tragically, after 16 years of marriage, Renee passed away suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition, leaving Doug to raise their daughter as a single father. The loss was devastating for Doug, driving him closer to his faith and forging an exceptionally tight bond with Eva. For a long time, the prospect of entering another relationship was far from his mind. That changed in August of the year 2016, when Doug attended a high-profile political action committee event in West Palm Beach, Florida, in support of a presidential candidate. It was at this event that he met Ashley Byers, a 24-year-old volunteer and events coordinator for the campaign staff. Despite a 30-year age difference, the attraction was immediate. The two discovered they possessed similar political ideologies, a strong faith-based approach to life, and a shared passion for firearms, with both holding permits to carry concealed weapons. In fact, on the very night they met, Ashley was carrying a concealed weapon in close proximity to the Secret Service detail guarding the presidential candidate. Ashley's background was as vibrant as it was varied. Having trained extensively in classical ballet from a young age, she had danced professionally until a knee injury sidelined her career in her early 20s, leading her to transition briefly into modeling. Her entry into political volunteering had been sparked by an event she attended with her mother, where she was noticed by campaign organizers and subsequently hired. Smitten by what she perceived as Doug's maturity and shared values, and with Doug equally captivated by her charm and passion, the couple made the impulsive decision to marry in a private ceremony just 13 days after their initial meeting. Fearing his family would try to dissuade him due to the rapid pace of the relationship and the significant age gap, Doug kept the marriage a secret from his loved ones initially. Following their quiet wedding, Ashley left her political work to join Doug in Charleston, where they quickly became a prominent couple. They traveled widely, attended elite social gatherings, and were featured in local media. Their family grew in the year 2018 with the birth of their daughter. Yet behind the polished public image of a successful entrepreneurial husband and a beautiful former ballerina lay a marriage that was rapidly disintegrating. The crack in their relationship became apparent during the launch of a highly ambitious project. Hoping to fulfill Ashley's lifelong dream of dancing, Doug used his business connections and funding from investment partners to establish a national classical ballet company in the summer of the year 2017. The venture initially showed great promise as they hired administrative staff and dancers. However, financial difficulties quickly emerged, leading to the layoff of several dancers and the eventual collapse of the company. With the failure of the business, the personal relationship between Doug and Ashley began to deteriorate rapidly. According to professional counselors who worked with the couple, Ashley began to report that Doug exhibited controlling behaviors, attempting to dictate her social circle and wardrobe. The escalation of their arguments reached a critical point when Doug, in moments of extreme emotional frustration, committed acts that would later damage his credibility in court. During legal depositions, Doug admitted to having punched a hole in a wall in their South Carolina home and, on another occasion, discharging a handgun into the ceiling during a heated argument. Fearing for her safety and that of her unborn child, Ashley obtained a temporary protective order, left a note terminating the marriage, and moved back to Florida to reside with her mother. Doug, however, struggled to accept the separation. He traveled to Florida, placed a tracking device on Ashley's vehicle, and frequently appeared in her vicinity. As the legal battles over custody and divorce dragged on for more than 2 years, Ashley and her mother began formulating plans to relocate to Maryland to seek a fresh start. Upon learning of this plan, Doug obtained employment in Maryland and insisted on moving with them to co-parent their daughter. This persistent pursuit increased Ashley's anxiety, setting the stage for the tragic confrontation on September 27, 2020. For investigators analyzing the case, the immediate challenge was to separate objective physical reality from 2 wildly differing personal narratives. While Ashley's supporters and legal team depicted her as a terrified survivor of systemic domestic abuse who had finally snapped under extreme pressure, Doug's family, including his older daughter Eva, painted a completely different picture. They described Doug as a loving, highly conscientious father who was the victim of a systematic campaign of parental alienation and psychological manipulation designed to deny him any access to his youngest daughter. To determine the truth, detectives had to rely heavily on precise physical clues and forensic analysis, which often tell a story that human testimony cannot alter. The first major red flag for investigators was the rapid mobilization of Ashley's legal and psychological support network. Within minutes of the shooting, and before detectives could even begin their formal assessment, a specialized domestic violence therapist and multiple family law attorneys arrived at the scene or the sheriff's office. This level of immediate legal coordination suggested to investigators that the incident might have been anticipated or prepared for, rather than being a spontaneous reaction to a sudden threat. Further doubts arose when crime scene technicians executed a search warrant on the residence where the shooting occurred. The house was almost entirely empty of furniture and household goods, as the family was in the process of moving. Yet, amid the bare rooms, investigators recovered 3 distinct firearms. 1 belonged to Ashley's mother, and 2 belonged to Ashley herself, with one of her weapons being found in a backpack and another in the kitchen pantry. Doug, by contrast, was completely unarmed at the time of his death. He carried no weapons, possessed no defensive tools, and did not even have his wallet on his person, wearing only a simple t-shirt and light footwear. Detectives also reviewed historical police reports involving the couple, which cast serious doubt on Ashley's credibility. In the year 2017, Ashley had contacted law enforcement with allegations that Doug was actively attempting to poison her and her unborn child. She presented a package of tea sent to her as a gift, claiming it had a suspicious odor. The report triggered a full response from a hazardous materials and bomb squad. But subsequent laboratory analysis revealed the tea was completely harmless. On another occasion, while hospitalized in Tampa in the spring of the year 2018, Ashley claimed she had been poisoned leading to an early induced delivery of her daughter. She subsequently omitted Doug's name from the birth certificate and withheld visitation for several months, until a family court judge ruled there was no credible evidence of poisoning and ordered visitation rights for the father. Perhaps the most extreme allegation surfaced when Ashley attempted to persuade law enforcement to exhume the body of Doug S.'s late wife, Renee, claiming that Doug had poisoned her as well. This claim was quickly refuted when South Carolina authorities and the coroner confirmed that Renee S.'s passing was entirely due to natural cardiac causes. To investigators, these repeated, uncorroborated allegations of poisoning suggested a deliberate strategy to construct a narrative of extreme threat, which could then be utilized in custody disputes to completely alienate Doug from his child. The ultimate resolution of the case, however, rested on forensic evidence from the crime scene itself. A key component of the defense was Ashley's assertion that Doug had physically assaulted her and was actively charging at Moatfer when she fired the weapon. To evaluate this claim, forensic experts analyzed Doug's clothing and body for gunshot residue. The lack of any stippling on his shirt or skin indicated that the firearm was discharged from a distance of at least 6 feet. Had there been a close-quarters physical struggle or an immediate physical attack as described, the distance between the weapon and the victim would have been significantly shorter. Furthermore, the autopsy report detailed the trajectory of the fatal projectile, which entered the right side of Doug's chest. This trajectory indicated that his body was turned sideways rather than facing Ashley directly in a posture of attack. This physical clue strongly suggested that Doug was likely turning away from her when the shots were fired, severely undermining the argument that lethal force was necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm. The psychological profile of this case offers a profound look into the sophistication and potential loopholes of modern criminal defense strategies. It illustrates how individuals can attempt to utilize the legal and social services systems, such as protective orders, child welfare investigations, and domestic violence advocacy, as strategic tools to achieve personal objectives. The ultimate irony of Ashley's sophisticated strategy was that her excessive reliance on extreme, unsubstantiated allegations eventually created a comprehensive paper trail of fabrication. By repeatedly crying wolf with allegations of tea poisoning and historical murder, she systematically eroded her own credibility, allowing investigators to recognize a distinct pattern of behavior aimed at complete control. When the trial commenced on July 23 in the year 2024, the case drew massive public attention, with the media labeling Ashley as the Black Swan due to her ballet background. During the proceedings, Ashley made the highly anticipated decision to testify in her own defense, delivering an emotional narrative of the evening of the shooting. She described a tense confrontation where Doug allegedly blocked her exit, struck her in the face, and pursued her into a bedroom, leaving her with no choice but to fire. However, the prosecution's cross-examination exposed critical weaknesses in her testimony. When pressed to demonstrate the physical actions of the alleged attack, her descriptions appeared highly theatrical and inconsistent with the forensic evidence. Observers and jurors noted that while she exhibited the physical motions of intense distress and weeping on the stand, there were no actual tears. The prosecution emphasized this discrepancy in their closing arguments, characterizing her actions as a long-standing pattern of manipulation directed at her husband, law enforcement, the courts, and ultimately the jury. After 6 hours of careful deliberation, the jury rejected the second-degree murder charge, but found her guilty of the lesser offense of manslaughter. She was subsequently sentenced to 20 years in state prison. This tragic case yields several vital life lessons for communities and individuals seeking to prevent similar outcomes. First, it underscores the critical importance of identifying early warning signs in relationships, particularly those that progress at an unnaturally rapid pace. Whirlwind romances that bypass the essential stages of mutual understanding often mask deep-seated psychological incompatibilities or control dynamics. Furthermore, the case highlights the destructive nature of high-conflict custody disputes, where children are unfortunately used as leverage. It suggests that society must develop more robust, objective mechanisms to evaluate allegations of domestic abuse in custody courts, ensuring that genuine victims are protected while preventing the weaponization of false claims. For law enforcement agencies, the investigation provides valuable methodologies for resolving complex domestic homicides where there are no direct eyewitnesses. The primary lesson is the absolute reliance on objective physical forensics, such as bullet trajectories, gunshot residue distribution, and scene reconstruction, to evaluate subjective claims of self-defense. Additionally, investigators can expedite the resolution of such cases by conducting thorough immediate background checks on the history of litigation between the parties. Recognizing a pattern of historical, uncorroborated police reports can quickly alert detectives to a broader narrative of alienation or fabrication, enabling them to focus their resources on the precise forensic realities of the crime scene rather than being misled by staged presentations. Ultimately, the tragic story of Doug and Ashley Benefield serves as a somber reminder of the devastating consequences of unresolved domestic conflict and the pursuit of total control at any cost. While justice was eventually served through a meticulous forensic investigation and a balanced legal process, the true cost of the tragedy is borne by the family left behind, particularly a young daughter who must grow up without either of her parents. By honoring the truth and relying on rigorous scientific analysis, the justice system succeeded in exposing the loopholes of a sophisticated fabricator, ensuring that the memory of the victim was respected and that the triumph of objective truth was upheld. The quiet, gated community of Lakewood Ranch, Florida, is often celebrated as an oasis of security, a sanctuary where manicured lawns and solid security gates promise a life insulated from the unpredictable dangers of the outside world. Yet, as history has repeatedly demonstrated, physical barriers and community associations cannot protect residents from the complexities and vulnerabilities of human relationships. On the evening of September 27, 2020, at approximately 7 o'clock, this peaceful enclave became the scene of a tragic event that would capture national attention and prompt a profound investigation into the intersections of domestic conflict, psychological manipulation, and the search for truth. The emergency dispatch operators in Manatee County received a distressed call from an elderly resident. The caller, sounding deeply concerned, reported that his neighbor had just arrived at his doorstep in an absolute state of shock, declaring that she had shot her husband. The caller identified the young woman as 28-year-old Ashley Benefield, and the man inside the home as her estranged husband, 58-year-old Doug Benefield. At the time of the incident, the couple had been living apart for approximately 3 years, and Ashley appeared entirely unable to comprehend the immediate physical status of her husband, expressing uncertainty over whether he was alive or deceased. Responding deputies arrived swiftly, encountering a scene of quiet tension. Acting on instructions relayed through the neighbor, Ashley stepped outside Vikepeha, her hands visible, and was placed in the secure environment of a patrol vehicle, while law enforcement officers conducted a sweep of the residence. Inside a back bedroom, they discovered Doug Benefield semi-conscious. He had sustained 2 gunshot wounds, one to his right leg and one to his upper right chest. Despite the immediate efforts of the deputies, who administered cardiopulmonary resuscitation and attempted to stabilize him, Doug Benefield succumbed to his injuries before reaching the hospital. For the investigators tasked with resolving the matter, there was never a mystery regarding the identity of the individual who had discharged the firearm. The central, far more complex question was why this fatal confrontation had occurred. In the days, months, and years that followed, detectives and legal professionals would delve deep into the history of a high-profile couple whose public image, characterized by travel, magazine features, and elite social circles, stood in stark, jarring contrast to the private reality of their marriage. To understand the trajectory that led to this fateful evening, investigators reconstructed the background of Doug Benefield. Born on October 2, 1961, Doug grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, where his father worked for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Raised in a devout, civic-minded household, Doug carried a strong sense of faith and duty throughout his life. After completing his undergraduate education at Texas Agricultural and Mechanical University, he enlisted in the United States Navy, serving with distinction as a naval flight officer operating from aircraft carriers during Desert Storm. Following his military service, Doug transitioned to entrepreneurship, utilizing his strategic skills to open a highly successful restaurant in the historic district of Charleston, South Carolina. While Doug found professional success, his personal life was marked by both deep devotion and profound grief. He married a single mother named Renee, with whom he shared a deep spiritual bond. Together, they raised Renee's 2 sons and welcomed their daughter, Eva, born in the year 2001. Tragically, after 16 years of marriage, Renee passed away unexpectedly due to an undiagnosed cardiac condition. The loss was a devastating blow for Doug and Eva, drawing them even closer as they navigated their shared grief. Doug's focus remained almost exclusively on his daughter and his faith, with little expectation of entering another relationship. However, in the late summer of the year 2016, during a political event in West Palm Beach, Florida, Doug met Ashley Byers. At 24 years of age, Ashley was 30 years younger than Doug. Yet they quickly discovered common ground in their shared political interests, religious beliefs, and a mutual enthusiasm for firearms. Ashley, who had trained extensively as a classical ballet dancer and later worked as a model, possessed a charismatic presence. The attraction between the two was immediate and intense, culminating in a private wedding ceremony just 13 days after their initial meeting. The rapid pace of their union set the stage for subsequent instability. The couple established a life in Charleston, where Doug sought to support Ashley's artistic aspirations by establishing a national ballet company funded by his investment partners. Initially, the project seemed poised for success, drawing talent and attention. However, by the summer of 2017, financial difficulties began to plague the organization. Staff layoffs and organizational restructuring followed, causing the ballet company to dismantle as quickly as it had been formed. As the business venture faltered, the marital relationship eroded. Ashley S. representatives and a consulting therapist, Dr. Barbara Russell, later asserted that Doug began utilizing controlling behaviors, attempting to dictate Ashley S.'s social circles, wardrobe, and daily activities. The allegations escalated to reports of volatile displays of temper, including an incident where Doug punched a hole in a wall and another where he discharged a firearm into the ceiling out of frustration. Fearing for her safety and the well-being of her unborn child, Ashley obtained a temporary protective order, left Charleston, and moved to her mother's residence in Florida, leaving a note to terminate the marriage. This separation marked the beginning of a prolonged and highly contentious legal conflict over custody and visitation. Detectives examining the history of the couple uncovered a pattern of intense accusations. In the spring of 2018, shortly after Doug's legal counsel initiated communication to establish visitation guidelines before the birth of their child, Ashley sought medical attention at Tampa General Hospital. She asserted to medical staff that she believed she had been poisoned, requesting an early delivery of the child. Upon the birth of their daughter, Ashley omitted Doug's name from the birth certificate and withheld visitation rights, leading to legal intervention. Subsequent judicial reviews concluded there was no medical or forensic evidence to support the poisoning claims, and the presiding judge ordered a structured visitation schedule for Doug. This pattern of uncorroborated allegations continued. In another instance, Ashley contacted law enforcement regarding a package of tea sent by Doug as a gift, asserting it was contaminated. A comprehensive response involving hazardous materials specialists and a bomb squad revealed no harmful substances. Further claims alleging improper behavior toward their daughter were thoroughly investigated by social services and law enforcement agencies, yielding no evidence of misconduct. As the conflict progressed toward the autumn of 2020, Ashley and her mother began preparing for a relocation to Maryland. Doug, seeking to remain active in his daughter's life, secured employment in the same region with the intention of following them. However, a critical custody hearing was scheduled for September 30th, 2020, a mere 3 days after the shooting, which threatened to alter the existing custody arrangement in Doug's favor. On the evening of September 27th, Doug arrived at the Lakewood Ranch residence to assist with packing. An altercation ensued, during which Ashley claimed Doug became physically aggressive, blocked her exit, and struck her in the face. She asserted that she retreated to her bedroom, obtained her handgun, and fired in self-defense when Doug advanced toward her. Investigators, however, utilized forensic science to evaluate these assertions. A detailed analysis of the physical evidence raised significant contradictions. Forensic specialists examined Doug's clothing and body for gunshot residue, finding a complete absence of stippling. This scientific finding indicated that the muzzle of the firearm was at least 6 feet away from Doug when the shots were fired, a distance inconsistent with an immediate physical struggle. Furthermore, the autopsy report revealed that the fatal bullet entered the right side of Doug's chest, suggesting his body was turned away from the shooter rather than facing her in a direct forward charge. The search of the residence also revealed that while the home was largely packed and cleared for relocation, 3 loaded firearms remained accessible, including 2 belonging to Ashley and 1 belonging to her mother. Doug, conversely, was completely unarmed, carrying no weapons, defensive tools, or even his personal wallet. These details, combined with the timing of the impending custody hearing, led investigators to conclude that the shooting was not a spontaneous act of self-defense, but rather the culmination of a deliberate effort to permanently resolve the custody dispute. In November of 2020, Ashley Benefield was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The legal proceedings culminated in a highly publicized trial in July of 2024. The defense argued passionately that Ashley acted out of profound fear for her life, pointing to Doug's past erratic behaviors as justification for her actions. Ashley testified in her own defense, presenting an emotional narrative of the altercation. The prosecution, however, emphasized the forensic inconsistencies, presenting the shooting as a calculated decision to avoid an unfavorable custody ruling. Following 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the lesser charge of manslaughter. This verdict reflected the jury's careful navigation of a highly complex and emotionally charged case, recognizing the tragic loss of life while acknowledging the complex domestic dynamics involved. Ashley was subsequently sentenced to 20 years in prison. For law enforcement professionals, this case underscores several critical principles of modern investigation. First, it highlights the primacy of physical and forensic evidence over subjective testimonies. In highly charged domestic disputes, where emotions are intense and narratives are frequently polarized, the objective recording of bullet trajectories, stippling patterns, and physical scene details remains the most reliable pathway to truth. Second, the case demonstrates the value of comprehensive background investigations. By examining years of previous police reports, medical records, and custody filings, detectives were able to establish a clear context and identify behavioral patterns that informed their evaluation of the crime scene. From a societal perspective, this tragedy offers profound lessons regarding the resolution of domestic conflict. It emphasizes the critical importance of early, constructive intervention and the utilization of professional mediation to address deep-seated disputes. When personal relationships deteriorate, relying on legal frameworks, transparent communication, and psychological support can prevent conflicts from escalating to physical confrontation. Ultimately, the resolution of this case honors the diligent efforts of the investigative forces and judicial officers who worked meticulously to separate fact from fiction, ensuring that justice was served while providing a somber reminder of the human cost of unresolved domestic discord. The dynamics of human relationships often present a profound complexity, where the public image of a perfect partnership can diverge significantly from private reality. In the modern era, the intersection of intense personal ambition, complex custody disputes, and the strategic use of legal and social support systems can sometimes lead to tragic outcomes. An analysis of et u shehat cases reveals how a conflict can escalate when one party attempts to construct a meticulous narrative of victimhood to achieve their personal objectives. By examining the tragic events surrounding the life and untimely passing of Doug Benefield, it is possible to understand the psychological mechanisms of parental alienation, the forensic details that investigators rely on to uncover the truth, and the broader societal lessons that can be drawn to prevent similar tragedies. The story of Doug Benefield begins in the city of Huntsville, Alabama, where he was born on October 2, 1961. Growing up in a dedicated military family, his early life was shaped by structure, discipline, and a strong sense of community. His father was an engineer who contributed to the space exploration programs at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, while his mother, Suzanne, was a committed homemaker who raised her children with traditional values. Religion played a central role in his upbringing, with regular church attendance establishing a foundation of faith that Doug would carry throughout his life. After completing his high school education, Doug enrolled at Texas Agricultural and Mechanical University, initially planning to pursue a career in medicine. The United States Navy offered to sponsor his medical education, but after enlisting, his career took a different direction. He served as a naval flight officer, operating off aircraft carriers during Operation Desert Storm, and completing 2 deployments before retiring from active service in 1999, while remaining in the reserves. Upon transitioning to civilian life, Doug utilized his skills and family connections to embark on an entrepreneurial path. He relocated to the historic city of Charleston, South Carolina, where he became involved in the restoration and renovation of the downtown area. He opened a restaurant that quickly achieved significant success, establishing him as a respected member of the local business community. Despite his professional achievements, Doug desired to build a family of his own. He eventually met Renee, a single mother who was raising 2 boys. Renee was a college graduate of high intelligence and deep Christian faith, qualities that immediately attracted Doug. They married within the same year of their meeting, and in 2001, their daughter Eva was born. For 16 years, Doug and Renee built a stable and loving household until tragedy struck when Renee passed away suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition. The loss of his wife was a devastating blow to Doug, causing him to lean even further into his religious faith and bringing him and his daughter Eva even closer together. For a time, Doug focused entirely on raising his daughter, with no intention of pursuing another romantic relationship. However, in August of 2016, his path crossed with a young woman named Ashley Byers at a political event in West Palm Beach, Florida. Doug, who was 54 years old at the time, was invited to the event by his business partners. Ashley, who was 24 years old, was working as a volunteer events coordinator for a political campaign. Despite the 30-year age difference, the two found immediate common ground. They connected deeply over their shared religious beliefs, conservative political views, and a mutual interest in firearms, as both held permits to carry concealed weapons. During their initial meetings, Doug learned about Ashley's background as a professional ballerina who had performed with a dance company until a knee injury forced her to transition into modeling. The romance progressed with remarkable speed. Just 13 days after their initial meeting, Doug and Ashley were married in a private ceremony. The marriage was kept secret from Doug's family. As he anticipated, they would advise him to proceed with greater caution. Following the wedding, Ashley moved to Charleston to begin her new life with Doug. The couple appeared highly successful, traveling frequently, attending elegant social functions, and being featured in regional lifestyle magazines. In 2018, their family grew with the birth of their daughter. To fulfill Ashley's lifelong dream of maintaining a connection to the world of dance, Doug utilized funding from his investment partners to establish a new national ballet company, the American National Ballet. However, the rapid foundation of both the marriage and the business soon began to show signs of instability. By the summer of 2017, the ballet company had begun to hire dancers and staff, but financial difficulties quickly emerged. The venture was unable to sustain its operations, leading to the layoff of several dancers and the eventual collapse of the company. The financial strain of the business failure put immense pressure on the marriage, and the relationship between Doug and Ashley began to deteriorate rapidly. Fights became frequent, and Ashley alleged that Doug began displaying controlling and aggressive behaviors, including dictating her social circle and attire. During this period of marital strife, Ashley discovered she was pregnant. Rather than bringing the couple closer together, the pregnancy coincided with an escalation in their disputes. Ashley claimed that Doug's behavior became increasingly volatile, culminating in an incident where he discharged a handgun into the ceiling of their home out of frustration. Fearing for her safety and the well-being of her unborn child, Ashley obtained a temporary protective order, left a note ending the marriage, and relocated to her mother's residence in Florida. Doug, however, was unwilling to accept the end of the relationship and followed her to Florida, establishing a presence in the area.